what's going on YouTube in the Gospel Gambit chess school community? My name's Kevin, aka Gospel Gambit, and welcome back for another video of a game review of a match that I just played earlier today. It's going to be on the Scorpion-Horus Gambit, one of the declined variations. Actually, earlier today we just published our part 3 in our Scorpion-Horus Gambit guide. And part 3 went over all the decline variations, so it's kind of fitting that we ended up getting a model game after publishing it. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to show you guys this game today. As you can see as well, I have a Elite Chess study full of model games and all sorts of openings that I personally recommend. You can find those list of recommendations on my school, that's SKOOL, community page. And the link to join that, it's completely free. That community is down in the description. All right, without further ado, let's dive right into the game. The Scorpion-Horus starts with e4, which is what I recommend to start all games. And black decides to go with a Caro-Kann with c6. We play knight to c3, d5, and pawn to d3. This dives into the Scorpion-Horus Gambit, or it allows black to choose to go down that path. If you want a full breakdown of the accepted lines, decline lines, like I said, go check out, it's on my YouTube page, as well as in more depth over on our school page in one of the classrooms there. All right, if they accept it, then they would take on e4. We would play bishop out to g5, and we would dive down the accepted lines. In the decline variation, though, black has a few different options. They can push d4. They can play knight to f6. They can play e6, h6, a6, even g6 are all options for black. And in this game, we get the e5 variation from black. Now, in almost all the decline lines, from my digging, you don't necessarily get a huge advantage one way or the other for white or black. But our goal, the whole reason why we chose this opening with e4 and knight c3, d3, is that these lines are very rare for black to see when they choose to play the Caro-Kann. They have to get prepared for the advanced variation, the fantasy variation, the exchange variation, the pan-off, all sorts of Caro-Kann variations that white can lead that opening down. So we chose the variation that they almost see the least when doing some of the research on it. Black sees this opening close to 0.2% of all games if they go down the accepted variation. And for just the first 3 moves, we've already reduced the amount of games to, I think it's close to 6% of games go anywhere close to like where we're at. So after e5, it almost is like we're playing the fantasy variation, but we play f4. So in the fantasy Caro-Kann, normally we would have our pawn here on d4, and this pawn would be back on f3. So we would have a similar structure, but just in reverse. So that's going to be like an important note here as we go further in the game. In the fantasy, black does play e5, striking in the center. So I believe, and you're going to see as we go through the game here, black does bring the bishop out to c5, and that's one line that black can take in the fantasy Caro-Kann. The difference here, though, is that with f4 instead of f3, we now have a nice square for our knight to jump into to develop, whereas before when the pawn's on f3, obviously we can't develop our knight there, and we can get checkmated quickly if we're not careful in the fantasy variation by trying to develop our knight to e2 when black has their bishop and queen staring down at us here. So be careful of that. You can check out that on your own time. So in all of those previous decline variations, like I said, I recommend in my guide for us to strike right away at the center with f4. Black has a few different options. They can go d4 here, and that kind of transposes into some of the d4 lines right away. And black can obviously take either of these pawns. They could develop their other pieces here and that's exactly what black does. They go bishop to c5. Like I said, I believe they're kind of treating this as a almost like a fantasy variation, but because, like I said, the pawn's not on f3 and instead on d3, normally black tries to induce white to take the pawn here, and we never have this pawn push on d4 to kind of clog up this diagonal. So as you can see, the computer already gives us a slight advantage here. Kind of did a quick thing since I had never seen this move personally. But after some time, knight to f3 seemed like the right move to play. At this point, I thought black would maybe continue with queen to b6 in that manner, but instead chooses to take the pawn on f4. From here, we continue our development, taking a pawn. Again, we just have to be careful and do some calculations before we take that pawn to see if queen b6 is still a threat. And I actually have one of the variations here. So if we end up taking the pawn, let's say here, black f6, knight to f3. If black continues and tries to go down this line, so this is pawn takes on e5, which is possible. It's technically the top move, but because I hadn't studied it, I did not feel comfortable kind of diving down into this line. You can see knight f3 is just right behind it anyways. But if you do take the pawn, black can give you a check and force you to go uncastled. And you have to kind of go down this interesting line here where eventually we trade queens. We have a really weird kind of game, but pretty much we try to induce black to trade off this light squared bishop, and we play the bishop pair versus the knight pair. So if you want, like I said, this link to this study will be in the description below. You can kind of dive into that whole line, but I wanted to kind of avoid that, which is why I went with knight f3 first. Black elected to take on f4, we take back, and decided to develop with knight to e7. Obviously, I mean, the top move here is knight f6, at which point we do go e5. And we're going to get some lines where black's going to attack our dark squared bishop. Probably going to have to retreat it back down to d2 or even c1 as the computer says. And it gets a little complicated from there. But in this game, black elects to go for knight to e7. And at this point, I wanted to play against this dark squared bishop. I was hoping to get castled kingside in this game, as I wanted to take advantage of this half open file with my h-rook. The computer does also suggest a few different options of getting our queen up and possibly going queenside. It's definitely a thought to have here, though a lot of our minor pieces are already on the king side, so moving our king over to the queen side puts us in some trouble, possibly in the middle to late game, as a majority of black's minor pieces are on our king, would be on our king side where we castled. So just kind of some thoughts that you have to have before choosing which side of the board you want to put your king on. So not only are we going towards where all of our pieces are, which means that we're going to be safer, but all of our pieces are also going to be firing down at black's king as well. So we continue with d4, pushing black's dark squared bishop back. And at this point, I wanted to complete my development now that we had shut down this d4 spot. Obviously, I kind of had to do some calculations on, is c5 a move to try to break up the center? Do I want to play e5 and have a semi-strong pawn duo here? I thought e5, though, black is going to go right away at the center. He was going to be one or two steps closer to getting castled, whereas my bishop still would have been on f1, and I would have been at least one, if not two moves away from castling myself. And in this line, we don't mind bringing our knight even over to the king side if he wants to take there. We can always reinforce our pawn with the move c3. If we go take, take, castle, castle, c3, there's also different ideas of then getting our bishop onto d3 and having a strong kingside attack. From here, black decided to pin my knight on c3. Not really too worried about double pawns. Remember, we're going to be playing on the king side, so having double pawns over here is even better for us as well. I almost want to invite double pawns on the c file, because now anytime black decides to go c5, we can ignore this move altogether. If he goes c5, takes, undoubles our pawn, we still have another pawn to reinforce our center right behind it. So I was welcome to see this move, and I decided to castle. Let's get it over with. Black still has decided not to castle, and at this point he does end up taking on c3. As you can see, the computer has already decided that we're +1 on the evaluation bar, and black decides to take. So obviously black is taking this knight here, thinking that, well, he'll remove the defender of e4 and cause us some difficulty with our pieces, right? Pawn on e4, hitting our knight. But that's exactly what we are hoping to see. We want to remove these two minor pieces from the f file to open up the eyes of our rook. And this pawn is going to be a weakness that we can attack as the game goes on. And we have ways to play around this pawn capture here. Our knight has great squares to jump in, as g5 and e5 have a lot of potential. They're all staring down at this f7 square, which our rook's going to be staring down at. And we even have ideas of getting a bishop to c4, queen to h5. You can see just all of our pieces are going to be converging on black's king if he does decide to castle kingside here. So after takes, we have to move our knight. And the best square to go to is g5. As you can see, we're down a pawn, but the computer evaluation has us +1.5. At this point, black decides to go uncastled. Like I said, you can kind of see all the pieces coming together here as our pieces are working very well together. I mean, we have a great little post for this dark square bishop as well. The computer wants black to castle right away, kind of get the rook over there to help reinforce the f7 square. Instead, black tries to hang on to this pawn. Now remember, black's already up a pawn, and by choosing to try and hold on to it, again, this knight g5 move also attacks the pawn here. So we could easily get a recapture. We would even be threatening a check. All sorts of different ideas there. So black kind of gets scared, and instead of just giving the pawn back, ends up playing a very weakening move, which is f5. Now all of a sudden our checks are coming, our bishop moves are coming with check. We have an open c4 to g8 diagonal, and we dive in right away. Now black is unable to castle kingside. In the event of a move like b5, we have this cozy square here on b3, keeping an eye on this diagonal, and black is just not going to be in time to create any sort of pressure here on our c4 bishop, and this is going to be one of our star pieces throughout the game. Look for these ideas, bishops that can cut off kings from castling. You see this a lot with the dark squared bishop. If the dark squared bishop gets exchanged for the knight on c3 and we're able to deploy it early on in the game, we can cut our opponent's king from castling. And same idea for black if they're ever able to get their light squared bishop out and cover the f1 square. So kind of look for that idea in some of your games. It can be very frustrating to play against, and black or white can have a lot of difficulties trying to get their king to safety. So now we've kept black's king in the center. Black has 5 undeveloped pieces, a knight that's not really developed that well either, overextended e and f pawns, and we are castled. We have a rook, 3 minor pieces already playing in the game, a queen that has wonderful light squares to play off of here, with the ease of our a1 rook to get to b1 if we do end up playing on the queen side for whatever reason. Black ends up diving into d5 here, trying to block our contact with the g8 square, at which point we play queen to h5, bringing one of our last pieces into the game. Knowing that black is going to have to play g6, there's really no other option here, as we are threatening mate on f7 if black goes to f8, and if black does decide to go uncastled, that's just going to be a world of hurt, as our pieces are going to be flying into black's home. So black plays g6, and now we play queen to h6. Now we're cutting black off again from castling. At this point, black doesn't want to even castle kingside anyways, even though their c and d pawns have moved. They would love to castle queenside, but it's going to take at least 1, 2, 3, 4 moves by the time black has the option to castle queenside. So, and we already have all of our pieces in the game, so we got to keep up the attack. At this point, black brings their queen into the game, trying to bring another defender over to the king side here, one of the stronger ones. And if black can trade the queens, then obviously the game gets a lot tougher for us to close out. Remember, we're still even on material. Our advantage here, 4.6, is literally all of the positioning advantage that we have. So the computer thinks we're almost up a full rook just from the position of our pieces. Now, I missed a kind of not a crazy idea, but a very interesting idea here, where rook to a to e8, a to e1 is an idea. Obviously, our bishop is hanging here. Take, take, and let's say just black plays an off move. We can actually just sacrifice a rook here on the e4 square, as we are going to be able to pin black's queen to their king. I was looking for some of these ideas during the game, but I just could not see the full compensation of breaking through. I mean, still a pretty healthy pawn chain here from black, so we're trying to cut through that, just blasting through on e4. Another just crazy idea, and another one to look at. It can be tough to see without pawns on the D or F files to influence this pawn, how this would work exactly. So instead, I went a different direction and played bishop to e5. It did end up giving up a good chunk of our advantage here, but my idea is we get to attack black's rook here. We do have 2 attackers on the h7 pawn. If we can pick up another pawn, that's great. And if not, then, well, black ends up playing a bishop to f6. Now, at this point, you can see that the evaluation already jumping back up to close to +6. Black really only had 1 move, so I mean, we still were positive after this move here, bringing our bishop into a wonderful diagonal. Black has no dark squared bishop to contest us, and really has to find an only move. Not the hardest move to find, but an only move nonetheless to keep the +2 advantage under control. Instead, black elects to go in for a self-pin on the knight on f6 now. And at this point, I did a long think. I did not end up finding the best continuation, as we'll kind of go over. What I'm seeing here is black has this jump into g4 right now, hitting our queen and also hitting our bishop on e5. Obviously, this is a great piece for us here, and I would love to not have to trade it away for one of black's pieces. When you're on the attack, you'd like to keep as many pieces as possible, unless you see a forcing sacrifice or forcing capture that leads to further advantages. And I was trying all sorts of knights into f7, bishop to f7. But in my head, I just could not. I missed the winning move here, which is bishop to f7. But I couldn't visualize how this was all going to go down once black's king started drifting over to the queen side here, and I didn't want to let them escape. So I took the subtle approach and played the move h3, taking away this square from black's knight, and black is still very far away from finishing their development here, so I felt that I had time to play h3, and as you can see, we're still +3, +2.5 in the evaluation's eyes, so a totally fine move in that sense. I'll kind of show the bishop check, which is the top engine move here. If black decides to move their king out of the way, well, we are able to now infiltrate our queen into g7. And that's kind of a huge thing. We're hitting black's rook now, and we have 2 attackers on black's knight. So that just wins material by force. And if black tries to save their rook, well, something's going to fall here. A knight, a rook, something. So we went with the more safe approach. We went with h3. Black ends up developing another knight here. And obviously I'm re-looking at now these types of moves to see if anything has gotten better. And indeed it has. I end up going for the knight move here. It still wants this idea, actually. That's almost checkmate. Black has to give up their queen, otherwise it is checkmate. So I didn't see that, but obviously I was looking at this rook in the corner, and black's queen is now almost trapped. Obviously that line that we just did also traps black's queen, but I went with another approach. Knight to f7. Black tries to save their rook. Now bishop to d6. Completely cutting off all the squares from black's queen and hitting black's rook if black decides to move the queen. Black tries a desperado move here. Instead of just taking everything on f7 and trading down, they go for this knight to g4 move, thinking, okay, they're opening up a square for their queen while also counterpunching our queen here. But with the subtle h takes g, black moves their queen to f6, and with g5, black's queen is trapped again. Our pawns are taking care of the dark squares. Our queen has control of g7. Our knight has control of h8. Our light squared bishop, e6, and dark squared bishop and knight have d8. So black does end up trading their pieces down here, and from this point on, we're just trying to trade off pieces as we have a queen for a minor piece. We are up a bunch of material here pretty much. I slide my rook over to the other half open file, making it difficult for, if black ever wants to move this light squared bishop, just to cluster up on their position a little bit more. Black goes for this a5 push, which is, I think, one of the worst moves here they can do. Originally, I thought black was going to maybe put their knight on b6, kind of block the sights of my rook here on b7. Now with this move, black cannot support their knight coming into b6. We lock black's pawn into place. They end up going with b7. I don't play the cleanest moves here, but as you can see, after this move here, our goal is to extricate our dark square bishop. We don't mind giving back some material here, as black does end up taking. We undouble our pawns, and now we can bring our second rook into the game. Black goes for their bishop to e6. We defend our pawn. Black tries to get their second rook back into the game themselves, and at this point, we just start getting our pieces. We make room for our queen to have access to the d6 square. Black tries to make a break on this queen side here. We trade one pawn away, and we bring our queen into the game. Finally, finishing the game with a nice check, check, bring our queen all the way over to h8, threatening check, and then mate, and that's exactly what we got here. So that's the Scorpion-Horus Gambit on the declined side, guys. This is with the e5 on move 3. I'll scroll down here. This is the tail of the tape of the game that was just played. If you would like, you can see the full game recap in the Lead Chess study below. It's going to be the 4th chapter, Scorpion-Horus Gambit declined, 3 e5 by black. As you can see, we have 3 to 4 other Scorpion-Horus Gambit games, from the accepted lines to other declined variations, as well as a bunch of Caro-Kann games from the black side, Smith-Morra games, Scotch Gambit, Leonhard Gambit, which is my favorite on playing against the Scandinavian defense, and some reverse Morra games, so versus the c4 opening. Alright guys, if you like this, please join us on our school community, that's skool.com, and look for Gospel Gambit Chess. It's a totally free community to join. I have guides on there, I have opening recommendations, all for the club level player. I think anyone of that level or below can easily gain some information from it and become a better chess player. We're also there to help support each other, help look over each other's games, as well as just grow as chess players and human beings together. Have a great night, guys.